All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be my movie review for the Marvel Cinematic Universe blockbuster film Captain Marvel. And I'm going to start off my review by saying this. Approximately 2 years ago or so, I told many of you brothers who frequent my channel that Hollywood was going to use this whole Harvey Weinstein narrative, the allegations that he was some type of super sexual predator amongst these Hollywood whores, aka actresses, as a jumping off point or a springboard for a total recalibration for their action film paradigm. They were going to make almost every action film from late 2016 or 2017, whenever that Me Too shit started. They were going to make every action film after that predominantly led by females, because they wanted to change the way people thought about action stars. They no longer wanted to cast men in authoritative roles. And let me also say this. When I say these whores in Hollywood, I'm not just talking about the actresses, the actors as well, because they're all pansexual. But make no mistake about it. In order for you to be a prominent actress in Hollywood, you have to put out. You have to be a whore. The same way with the men. The men have to put out for the casting directors as well. So it's not so much about a gender thing. It's about an amorality thing. But you know what? It's neither here nor there. We're going to get to the point with this film, Captain Marvel. This was one of the most toxically feminine films that I've ever seen. I mean, blatantly toxically feminine, to the point where they forsook any attempt to actually make a good movie. This was by far the worst Marvel Cinematic Universe film that I've seen. You know what? I can't say by far the worst, because there have been some duds, and there have also been some films that I thought were overrated. Like, I thought Guardians of the Galaxy was overrated, but this film was very terribly made, poorly acted, and I felt very sorry for Samuel L. Jackson, because what we witnessed on the screen was a complete emasculation of Nick Fury, someone who's known for being a forward thinker. When I say a forward thinker, someone who thinks 7, 8, 9 steps ahead. That's a part of his character archetype. And he was relegated in this film to a bumbling sidekick, someone to make Brie Larson's character of Captain Marvel look smarter than she really was, because that's normally what occurs in female-oriented films or female-driven films based on toxic femininity. They're unable to make the female lead character more sophisticated, so what they do is they dumb down all the male characters. There was no inkling that the Nick Fury in that film would have anything in common with the Nick Fury that we saw in Iron Man and Captain America, so on and so forth. But as usual, most of these super feminist female directors have far less respect for both men and women than the male directors have for female characters. Male directors have gone out of their way to depict Black Widow, the Scarlet Witch, the Dora Milaje, whoever, as empowered, intelligent individuals. But once you allow a toxically feminine female to gain control over any type of franchise of preeminence, the first thing that she's going to do is go to extremes. Because I tell you brothers all the time, the woman in general is a two-dimensional thinker. So her characters tend to be very two-dimensional. I can watch a film and I can tell whether it was directed by a so-called black man, by a woman, by a so-called super liberal Caucasian. You can tell, because there are certain themes and motifs that they're going to try to propagate in their films. And this film of Captain Marvel, for those of you brothers who might not understand what the movie was actually about, it was about the elevation of the divine feminine and the dissipation of the quote-unquote divine masculine. This character of Captain Marvel is meant to be a metaphor for the ancient Sumerian goddess known as Inanna. And I've mentioned her in the past. The name Inanna literally means the Queen of Heaven. And for you brothers who read the scriptures, you'll know that the Queen of Heaven, quote-unquote, is mentioned in Jeremiah the 7th chapter, Jeremiah the 44th chapter, etc. Because she also goes under other titles, but she was known as the Queen of Heaven in those examples in the book of Jeremiah. Once again, in ancient Sumer, or Shinar, as the scriptures call it, she was known as Inanna, and that name literally means the Queen of Heaven. She went on to be called Ishtar. That's the symbol on the chest of Captain Marvel, that 8-pointed star. When you see it on the woman, that's for Inanna. When you see it on the man, it's for Jupiter. And that's part of the contention that we saw in the film between Captain Marvel, or Carol Danvers' character, and the character of Jan Rogue, played by Jude Law. Jude Law was Jupiter, or Zeus. She was Inanna, or Hera, and they were constantly butting heads, going back and forth. which built up to the toxically masculine confrontation between the divine feminine and the divine masculine at the very end of the film. But I just want to go through a few things for a moment. Okay, so now, brothers, the film Captain Marvel happened to be co-directed and also co-screenwritten by the directorial pair of Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, who also happen to be quote-unquote super liberal Caucasian Jews. And the reason why I bring that up is because I tend to notice, once again, that whenever many of these social justice warrior films or propaganda pieces are made, especially featuring toxic femininity or quote-unquote racial philosophizing that never leads black people anywhere productive, is always commandeered or captained by super liberal Caucasian Jews. And I also notice that they tend to promote the veneration of the Greco-Roman mythos, which descends from the Sumerian mythos. They tend to have a great deal of knowledge and understanding of it. I'm not quite sure if it's part and parcel to what they're actually taught as children within their homes, or if it's something that has anything to do with the Kabbalah or what have you. But they're constantly pushing the quote-unquote pagan mythology within their films and many of the philosophies of the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. So somewhere along the line, they're being instructed in these things, and not just them, people of all races. There's a strata of people of all races that are being instructed in the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. But I do notice that they tend to be the directors and the screenwriters of many of these TV shows and movies that are pushing these vibrations out to the masses at large, particularly so-called black people. I just wanted to bring this to brothers' attention, but it was no surprise to me as I watched the film. I knew that it was directed by a woman. I went to see a film a couple of years ago called Detroit, which basically was about the Detroit riots. And as I was watching the movie, I could tell that it was directed by a woman because she was going out of her way, or the film was going out of its way, to try to cast many of the people who were in that hotel in a complimentary light or in a compassionate light. And as I watched the movie, I felt sorry for no one involved in that situation. No one. The so-called black people who were involved in that situation were idiots. The so-called Caucasians who were involved in that situation were idiots. And the director, whoever that person was, I believe that it's the same female who directed Hurt Locker, which also happened to feature Mr. Jeremy Renner and Mr. Anthony Mackie, ironically enough, who are both major parts of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She also directed that film, The Hurt Locker, the same woman who directed Detroit. But Hurt Locker was a far better film. But as I watched Detroit, I said to myself, I can tell this movie was directed by a woman because she's trying to overly emotionalize every situation. And I saw the same thing with this film, Captain Marvel. There were numerous portions in the movie where both her brother, when I say her, I'm talking about Captain Marvel's brother in the film, her brother and her father were being demonized in how they were depicted. Supposedly, they were trying to stop her from riding in race cars and riding on horses. Anything that was not quote-unquote feminine, her father and her brother were depicted as ridiculing her for. When she went to try to become an Air Force pilot, one of the male pilots made a sexual joke to her about a cockpit. Brothers, I'm sure as many of you know, when you work in a corporate environment or workplace environment that has both genders, women make as many sexual jokes towards men, if not more, as men do towards women. But this film was meant to be a hit piece on men. Now, brothers, for those of you who collected comic books back in the 80s, 70s, or what have you, you'll know that the original Captain Marvel was a man, was a male. He was also a Kree alien, a quote-unquote Kree alien, created by Stan Lee, who was meant to act as an offset to the Skrulls. I'm going to be covering that dynamic in a moment. But once again, the reason why they changed this character to a female is to give her a certain sense of authority. And also because, once again, she's supposed to represent the Queen of Heaven, or Inanna. That's why she fell from heaven near the beginning of the film. I'll be going over that in a moment. But originally, the character of Carol Danvers was called Miss Marvel, not Captain Marvel. But as we all know, the term captain denotes authority. The word captain literally means head. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to utilize these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to cast a mass spell on the people going to see them. The issue is that right now the Marvel movies are so popular that people are going to see them just based on reflex. And now, due to the deaths or dissipation of many of the more prominent male characters in the MCU, or at least in the Avengers aspect of the MCU, they're going to start to push female characters more into prominence. I'll be covering this in the review that I do on the Avengers Endgame film. But Captain Marvel was meant to serve as the initial attempt to spellcast the massive Marvel viewing audience to accept women as the new leaders. No more Tony Stark, no more Captain America, no more Thor. Now we're going to introduce you to Captain Marvel and many of these other quote-unquote female characters that you're supposed to accept. Even though the comic book world has always catered to young males, now suddenly they want to go social justice warrior. So we'll see how long this lasts. But once again, the original Captain Marvel was a man, and this represents Jupiter. Whenever you see a male character with an 8-pointed star, that's Jupiter or Zeus. That's known as the pentacle of Jupiter. Now, brothers, Annette Bening played the character of quote-unquote Mar-Vell. Now, Mar-Vell was originally known as Captain Marvel. Once again, Mar-Vell is the real name of Captain Marvel. And that term Marvel is always an allusion to Lucifer, a Luciferianism as well. Marvel was founded based on the tenets of Luciferianism, or the Kabbalah, or the Babylonian Mystery School system. That's another video that I'll be covering down the line when I deal with Stan Lee. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're trying to incrementally transfer all the power from the masculine principle to the feminine principle. So as in the comic books, you have Captain Marvel, whose real name is Mar-Vell. In the movies, you have the character of Carol Danvers, who was known as Miss Marvel in the comics, but now she's Captain Marvel. And they take the actual name Mar-Vell and apply it to this concept of the female super scientist, played by Annette Bening, who's supposedly trying to save the universe by utilizing the Tesseract to create a quote-unquote light speed engine that will help save the Skrulls from the male-dominated Kree. Notice that the Kree represent masculine energy or the masculine principle. The Skrulls were representative of those who are oppressed in Western society, or at least oppressed according to the dictates of the social justice warriors or super liberals, that being the quote-unquote Mexican or the Muslims. It was very clear to me that the Skrulls were meant to be analogous of the Muslims or the Mexicans. That's why they were trying to sneak their way onto Earth. That's why they were known as terrorists. They were being attacked by the Kree in a form of genocide or a quote-unquote holy war. And come to find out, the Skrulls, who are reptilian shapeshifters, are actually the good guys. Isn't that interesting? They created a movie with reptilian shapeshifters, and they're the good guys. So what is the director or the directors of this film telling you about their own personal beliefs, as well as Marvel, who handles the overarching storyline? Once again, when you see these directors, like even Ryan Coogler with the film Black Panther, he's told what the movie is going to feature, what it's going to be about. His job is just to make it look nice. He doesn't build the car. They hand him some towels and some shine for the car, and they tell him, make sure that it looks nice. That's your only job. Do not depart from the overall outline of the script. And that's the task that is given to every director associated with Marvel. But once again, please remember that in this film, the character that Annette Bening plays is not only, I believe her name is Wendy Lawson, the super intelligent space engineer and scientist, etc., working on Project Pegasus, but she's also manifested as the quote-unquote Supreme Intelligence. Remember that? That was her name in the film when she was manifested in the subconscious of Captain Marvel as the Supreme Intelligence. And it was also very clear to me that there were some attempts at a correlation between this character, played by Annette Bening, and Hillary Clinton, as someone who's going to be a magnanimous ruler. They're constantly trying to associate female leadership with magnanimity, with benevolence. And male leadership is malevolence and violence, so on and so forth. Okay, so brothers, I also wanted to highlight this character very quickly because, once again, her existence in the film was consistent with a couple of themes, that being the exaltation of the feminine principle, as well as the notion that every female character is supposed to be so much more intelligent than every male character. Her name is Dr. Minerva. And of course, she does have a substantiation in the actual Marvel comic book world, but the term Minerva is the goddess of wisdom. Most of the characters in the film were an allusion to the Greco-Roman pantheon of the Olympians, so on and so forth. So that is certainly an element that they're trying to push, of polytheism, and just harkening back to the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. Now, for many of you brothers who have followed the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a while, you'll know that one of the core themes or motifs of the last 10 years has been this object here, the quote-unquote Tesseract, which is really an allusion to a concept known in the ancient world as Metatron's cube, also known as the cube of Saturn, meant to denote the source of all life, so on and so forth. Metatron's cube is basically based on the premise that when you have 13 points or 13 nodes in a three-dimensional form, it forms a cube. In a two-dimensional form, it forms what's known as the quote-unquote flower of life. And there's also the concept of what the ancient Greeks called the 5 Platonic solids, that being all the quote-unquote substances from which life derives itself from. So the image of the cube has a resonance, and that's the reason why they placed it in the Marvel films. You'll see the concept of the cube being utilized all across much of pop culture. Whether it's the GameCube or the Xbox, so on and so forth, is always associated with the concept of the 0 point, or the source of all life. Now, for the sake of the MCU, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I believe it's known as the Space Stone, or the way in which you can engage in interdimensional travel. Remember back in the film Thor, I believe it was. No, not Thor. The first Avengers. Thor said, after they were able to retrieve the Tesseract, that he would be able to get back to Asgard. Asgard is the planet Saturn. That he'd be able to get back to Asgard with Loki by using the Tesseract. So the Tesseract represents space travel, so on and so forth. That's why the doctor, the so-called super intelligent doctor, Wendy Lawson, aka Marvel, was trying to use the Tesseract to invent a light-speed engine and hopefully be able to stop the male-dominated Kree society from destroying the entire universe, so on and so forth. So that's the point of the Tesseract, and that's why you're going to see it over and over again. Near the end of the film Avengers Endgame, Loki, representing the god of mischief and the quote-unquote clown god, who also is the god of origins, so on and so forth, was able to steal the Tesseract and get away with it. Because remember, the Avengers basically started a new timeline with their actions in an attempt to try to avert what Thanos was able to complete. But once again, pay very close attention to the fact that the Tesseract is the object that's used to empower Captain Marvel. The power of the Tesseract did not kill her. It filled her with limitless energy, made her basically a god, made her Inanna. Please understand that in the concept of the Mother Goddess, she's depicted as having fallen from heaven because she's the Queen of Heaven. What occurred early on in the film Captain Marvel? She falls from heaven, or veers, falls from heaven, and she lands in, I believe it's a Blockbuster video store. What's one of the first things that she does? She shoots the head off of Arnold Schwarzenegger and that cutout of True Lies, because Arnold Schwarzenegger represents that old guard of action star. Once again, they're trying to get you to no longer accept the concept of a man as an authoritative figure, as a lead. You have to either accept the male and the female as equals, quote unquote, at least in the fictional world, or you have to accept the woman as the head. These are images that are more for the masses. Amongst the elite, they already know that the man is the head. But for the masses, so-called regular people, you're supposed to consider the woman to be your head and to be smarter than you, especially if you're a so-called black man. And that brings us to our next subject. Now, brothers, if you followed the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know that Nick Fury is almost on the level of being diabolical with the way in which he's able to plot, plan, and scheme. In this film, we saw none of that, and that was purposeful. Because once again, in films that are toxically feminine, they're completely unable to conjure any notion or understanding on how to make a female character three-dimensional. I'm talking about in toxically feminine films. In real films, they showed the female lead character as someone who's three-dimensional. All you have to do is see the film Alien or Aliens, starring Sigourney Weaver, or the original Star Wars trilogy with the character of Leia. They had strong female characters who were not put in delusional situations where they were fighting 5 and 6 men at one time. Now that we're living in a toxically feminine environment, the woman has to project all of her insecurities on the screen. So that means what? She has to be able to fight and beat up men. That's what we saw all throughout Captain Marvel. What's this character just throwing men all around the spaceship? At the very end, she gets to outsmart and beat down the character of Jude Law, because once again, that represented the conquering of the divine masculine. The divine feminine has to conquer the divine masculine on screen. That's what's known as toxic femininity. And it's going to be the death knell for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I can see where they're heading, and they're not going to understand their error until they start to see the ticket sales dissipate. But just getting back to Nick Fury. This film reminded me, and how they treated him, reminded me so much of the Gillette commercial ad. You had so many Caucasian men who were upset by the Gillette commercial because of how they were depicted. They were depicted as the enemy. The Caucasian male was depicted as the enemy of society. And why is that? Because the liberal Caucasian female knows that the so-called Caucasian male is the top of the food chain. So how did they depict the so-called black male in the Gillette commercial? They depicted him as a complete simp. And when I say a simp, I mean not just a woman worshiper, but also a simpleton. Because that's how they view the so-called black man. They view him as someone who can be manipulated. They view him as someone who's just a security guard. They view him as someone who's just looking for a friend. That is your only job. And Nick Fury, or the character of Nick Fury in this film, might as well have been her trusty dog, as much as he was her quote-unquote partner, or so-called partner. He might as well have been her dog. The way that the director and the screenwriter of this film dumbed down not just the overall plot, but Nick Fury, it was embarrassing. Nick Fury was someone who we were told in the film Captain America lost his eye because it was the last time that he trusted someone. In this film, it shows him losing his eye because a cat scratched it out. That's the lack of regard and imagination that the female director had for his character. The film was so poorly made that you have people who left the theater who were quizzical about how Captain Marvel fit into the overall continuity of the MCU, because they did a very poor job of explaining how the Tesseract got into the hands of Wendy Lawson. Now, of course, it was a part of Project Pegasus, so that was a joint venture between S.H.I.E.L.D. and NASA. So that's how that's explained. But at the end of the day, the film was very clunky, it was very poorly executed, and the way in which they tried to minimize Nick Fury, it was embarrassing. But they showed you how the super liberal Caucasian views black people, not just Nick Fury's character, but also the black female. So-called blacks are expected to just follow behind a white female goddess archetype slavishly. And that's how they looked in the film. They looked like people who were following behind a Caucasian female goddess archetype in a slavish manner. The way that she spoke to them was almost like a slave master. And I'll be getting to the dynamic between her and her quote-unquote black best friend in a minute. But there's no way in the world that anyone with two eyes could see how Nick Fury was depicted and say to themselves, this is the same person that I've seen in all these other Marvel films. And I'm sure that Samuel L. Jackson did not have the courage to object to how his character was depicted, even though I'm sure that he knew what was going on. But Samuel L. Jackson is a reformed crackhead. A crackhead would do any role. Now, this is another very important still shot that I wanted to use in this video because it shows a lot. Not only can you see Samuel L. Jackson's character of Nick Fury looking at Veers or Captain Marvel with suspicion, because his character has been relegated to being basically a sidekick and a security guard, but also pay attention to how she's dressed. Once again, the promotion of the feminine principle, or the divine feminine, means that the divine masculine has to be torn down. The divine masculine has two manifestations. The left-hand side of Lucifer, aka Bacchus or Asar or Tammuz or what have you, or Heru. And there's the right-hand path manifestation, that being Christ of the Bible. Notice the t-shirt that they have her wearing here for 9-inch nails, which is meant to be an allusion to the nails that were driven into the wrists and through the ankles of Christ. So her character is meant to represent the destruction of any form of the masculine principle, or the quote-unquote masculine divinity. So now, brothers, the most interesting relationship in the film was without a doubt the rapport between the character of Veers and her quote-unquote best friend, Maria Rambeau. And I remember watching this film and watching how they looked longingly into each other's eyes near the end of the film, and I said to myself, it's very clear that the director or the directors, the screenwriters, etc., are trying to imply that these two females have a lot more going on in their lives, in their relationship, in their rapport with one another than just being quote-unquote best friends. It's very clear that what's implied is a lesbian relationship. And I've told you, brothers, that they've been trying to push that. They've been trying to find a way to surreptitiously push that or put that into the MCU, but they cannot do it overtly. There was a certain writer or columnist that I saw on the internet who was upset by the notion, which he thinks is a fact, but by the notion that the film Avengers Endgame did not have a gay character or lesbian character. Now, the Russo brothers who directed the Avengers Endgame film stated that there actually was a homosexual character in the film, played by one of the Russo brothers, in that scene where they were sitting in a circle and Captain America was acting as the therapist or the leader of group therapy for people who had been hurt or damaged or put through some type of stress disorder from the event that occurred in the Avengers Infinity War film. In all actuality, the gay character or the lesbian character in Avengers is Captain Marvel. She's a lesbian. Okay? Now, they might not say it overtly right now, but they're going to build up to it. And if you pay very close attention, you'll see it. And there were other people who also noticed the same thing. That's where I got this still shot from. It's very clear that what's implied is, once again, that there's a lesbian rapport or lesbian relationship going on between the character of Carol Danvers and Maria Rambeau. And yet again, that's meant to be a complete disrespect to the so-called black man. She's depicted in this film as a so-called single mother. There's no so-called black man of authority in the film whatsoever. Nick Fury was supposed to be, but he was relegated to basically being a dog. He was a dog in human form. And he gets his eye scratched out by a cat. There was even a scene where where Veers and the character of Nick Fury, they were at the Pegasus warehouse trying to figure out what was going on, trying to find some data to understand what happened to the character of Wendy Lawson. And for whatever reason, Nick Fury alerts the authorities to what's going on, and Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, takes his beeper away from him and says, "You clearly don't know what you're doing with this." Now, brothers, in what capacity does Nick Fury not know what he's doing? He's not a 20-year-old there. He's already of age. So whatever gifts he has mentally have already manifested themselves. That's why he's an operative with S.H.I.E.L.D. in the first place. So once again, they're trying to show him as someone who is incompetent, who needs to be led. That's why I say he plays a proverbial dog in the film. Just getting back to this rapport right here, though. It's so toxic. There's even a scene where, even though she's a single mother, she flies up into space with Carol Danvers and leaves her daughter here on Earth. And the daughter tells her, you have to go with her, because if you don't, if you stay here with me and actually be a real mother, you're setting a bad example for me. So once again, brothers, the film Captain Marvel was actually the Gillette commercial fleshed out into movie form. They take the so-called black man and make him a simp and a sidekick to the quote-unquote white super liberal female agenda. And at the very end, the super liberal Caucasian female gets to defeat the quote-unquote white male patriarchy, here played by the character of Jude Law. I believe his name is Jan Rogue, who's actually the quote-unquote deity Jupiter or Zeus. And he tries to provoke her by alleging that she's too emotional. And how does she express herself? By just hitting him with a force blast and letting him know that she can do what she wants. Notice that near the end of the film, in a very pivotal scene, there seems to be some type of apparatus or microchip that's on her skull that she removes. What does that represent? That represents the moderation of the woman by the man. Now her powers can be utilized to its fullness because she is a deity. This is the type of information that's being pushed on women of the other races by the super liberal Caucasian female, particularly the super liberal Caucasian Jewish female. They're teaching these things to the other races of females, and that's why a lot of men have the trouble that they're having. Okay? Men and women are no longer taught to work together, to complement one another. Now they're taught to compete with one another. And films like this are major propaganda pieces for that, or for those type of sentiments. And you're going to see, I mean, look, right now with Marvel, everything they do turns to gold, especially the Avengers storyline. There was a time period where, especially when the MCU first got started, where the films, they were very successful. But blockbusters, back when Iron Man and those other films first came out, Incredible Hulk, you did very well for yourself if your movie did 400, 500 million. Now these movies are expected to make $1.5 billion, $2 billion. So that's how you know that they can do no wrong. So now what they're going to start doing is they're going to start trying to mass spell cast on the masses. They're going to try to get them to conform to super liberal philosophies or ideologies until the people say no. It's the same thing that happened with ESPN. ESPN started to push a lot of super liberalism. And then after a while, the people said no. And they got rid of a lot of the idiots that were on their network. That's what's going to have to happen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because mark my words, over the next 4 or 5 years or so, you're going to see more and more toxically feminine material coming out from Marvel. They're trying to transition from any form of quote-unquote patriarchy in those films. And this was their initial overt volley. It's this Captain Marvel nonsense. So brothers, now we're going to delve deeper into the concept of who Captain Marvel actually is. That being the mother goddess of ancient Sumer, and thereby the mother goddess of the entire Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. She was known as Inanna. She was also known as Ereshkigal. So in other words, what? In the concept of Inanna, or the mother goddess, she falls to earth from the heavens. That's why she's always known as being Venus, or the Sirius star. And that's what occurs with this character of Captain Marvel very near the beginning of the film. Now let's pay very close attention to the emblem on her chest. I'm going to do a close-up. As I'm sure you brothers can see, it's an 8-pointed star. The 8-pointed star is the symbol for the Queen of Heaven, the quote-unquote Queen of Heaven, as she was named Inanna. The name, once again, literally means the Queen of Heaven. She became known later on as Ishtar, or Aphrodite, or Isis, the goddess of witchcraft, also the goddess of sex, so on and so forth. Ashtoreth, Asherah, so on and so forth. The list goes on and on. Ceres or Ceres, Demeter. Pay very close attention. As we can see, the 8-pointed star on the chest of this character played by Brie Larson, who's also very toxically feminine, by the way, and very obnoxious. So brothers, this right here is going to be some additional information on the etymology and the origins of the quote-unquote 8-pointed star and what its actual meaning is. As we can see here, there's an ancient depiction of the 8-pointed star, and there's also a modern depiction of the 8-pointed star. So let's see what it says. The star of Ishtar, or star of Inanna, is a symbol of the ancient Sumerian goddess Inanna and her East Semitic counterpart Ishtar. We just saw the 8-pointed star on the chest of Brie Larson playing Captain Marvel. Once again, she opens the film by falling from heaven to earth. That's one of the reasons why the mother goddess was venerated, because it was believed that she fell from heaven to earth, or her son fell from heaven to earth in the form of the stone or the rock. That is why, once again, at the quote-unquote Kaaba stone, or the cube located in Mecca, you have the black stone, and it's encased within that shape that resembles the vulva of a woman. Now let's read some more information on Inanna. Inanna is an ancient Mesopotamian goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, desire, fertility. She was known as the Queen of Heaven and was the patron goddess of the Iana temple at the city of Uruk. Now the city of Uruk was also associated with Gilgamesh, for you brothers who have heard of that entity of Gilgamesh. Her Babylonian equivalent is Ishtar. Her symbol is the hook-shaped knot of reeds, which also went on to become the symbol that the quote-unquote pharaohs of Kemet would use on their headdress. They would have the hook-shaped knot of reeds on either side of their headdress. So her symbols are the hook-shaped knot of reeds, the 8-pointed star, the lion, the rosette, and the dove. Brothers, have I not told you that the dove is the symbol of the mother goddess? Okay? The dove, or the Colombo. That's how you know that, once again, that massacre that occurred in Colombo, Sri Lanka, that was for the mother goddess. That is why they had it executed on Easter. Easter is another name for what? The mother goddess. Okay? Her Greek equivalent is Aphrodite. Her Hindu equivalent is Durga. Another name for Durga is what? Kali, the mother goddess of death and time, so on and so forth. Let's see some more information. There's going to be a depiction of the quote-unquote goddess Inanna at the top. We're going to see that picture in greater detail in a moment. It says in Jeremiah 7:18, the children gather wood, the fathers light the fire, and the women knead the dough and make cakes of bread for the Queen of Heaven. That is why the people do what they do on Easter. They're celebrating the Queen of Heaven. That's why you have what's known as the Easter bun. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger. Once again, this is for the Queen of Heaven. We've already seen the Queen of Heaven is Inanna. That is the character that was played by Brie Larson in the film Captain Marvel. This is how they get you to venerate the quote-unquote pagan gods. They try to exalt them in these films, in these comic book movies. So, brother, this is another depiction of the goddess, the quote-unquote goddess Inanna, or at least an alleged depiction. I'm of the belief that this is fabricated, but it still gets us to the point. That being that we see what the quote-unquote goddess Inanna is associated with. We see the owl, we see the twin lions at the bottom, and she's naked because what? She's a sex goddess. You understand that? That's why what is always associated with superfeminism, sexual freedom. The first thing they did was take off their bra. There are other depictions of the mother goddess where she's shown holding her breasts. Right? Now, I believe that this depiction is fictitious, that it's a fabrication, because all we have to do is look at the face. The face has no quote-unquote Hamitic features. The Sumerians were Hamites. Okay? Now let's look at some more accurate depictions of the quote-unquote goddess Inanna. This is a more accurate depiction of Inanna. Look at the face. You see the features? That's how you know that in the ancient world, all of the quote-unquote gods and goddesses were depicted as people with quote-unquote Negroid features or Hamitic features or what have you. Now we know that the Shemitic people were also Negro or Negroid. But the point being is this: the Sumerians were Hamitic. So any depiction of the quote-unquote gods of Sumer has to look Hamitic, or has to look quote-unquote Negroid-like. This is another depiction of Inanna. She has her foot on top of the lion. Look at the face yet again. See the face? You see how broad the nose is and how thick and prominent the lips are? This is the Sumerian mother goddess Inanna. This is who we're forbidden to venerate or worship, because the mother goddess is a false idol. It's based in the worship of the quote-unquote Mother Earth archetype, that being Eve. And that was reinvigorated, under Semiramis, who was also the dove goddess. Point being is this: that film Captain Marvel was some bullshit. And for you brothers out there who might want to know what my official rating for the film would be, I will give it, say, 2.5 stars out of 5 stars. But since my channel is called Chronicles of Judah, I'll make the rating system scrolls. So it would probably be 2.5 scrolls out of 5 scrolls. Point being is that the movie was some bullshit. And once again, brothers, just looking at this depiction right here, you can once again see the 8-pointed star in the upper left portion of this photo right here, or of this depiction of the quote-unquote goddess Inanna. So that's where they get all this stuff from. They always get it from ancient Sumerian mythology, or Greco-Roman mythology, or Kemetic mythology, so on and so forth. So peace.